How did your parents treat your siblings when you weren't around? I came home from college for winter break, and my 12-year-old sister Juliana, who has cerebral palsy, looked like a completely different person. She'd lost so much weight I could see her bones through her shirt. When I tried to hug her, she flinched away from me and wouldn't make eye contact. My parents said she'd been going through a difficult phase and refusing to eat. I went to Juliana's room that night to talk to her alone, and what I found made me sick. She was lying on a bare mattress with no sheets, and her wheelchair was nowhere in sight. When I asked where her chair was, she started crying and signed to me that Mom and Dad put it in the garage as punishment when she had accidents. Juliana couldn't get to the bathroom without her chair, so of course she had accidents, which meant she never got her chair back. She'd been crawling to the bathroom for months, and sometimes she didn't make it in time, which led to more punishment. I found out they'd been leaving her in her room for days at a time with just crackers and a water bottle, telling people she was too difficult to bring to family functions. My parents, who posted inspirational quotes about special needs awareness on Facebook, had been locking their disabled daughter away like a shameful secret. Juliana signed that they only cleaned her up when they knew someone was coming over. She'd developed infected bed sores from lying in the same position for hours because she couldn't move without help. I confronted my parents, and my mother actually said, "You don't understand how hard she's been while you were at school. She's been deliberately defiant." My father added that Juliana had been manipulating everyone with fake tears, and they had to use tough love. Tough love. They called starving their disabled child tough love. I asked why Juliana was so skinny, and my mother said she'd been refusing to eat as a power play. I found Juliana's medical alert button in my father's desk drawer, the one she was supposed to have for emergencies. He'd taken it because she was using it for attention. She'd had a seizure alone in her room and couldn't call for help, just had to wait until someone decided to check on her hours later. My parents had canceled her physical therapy appointments because they said she wasn't trying hard enough to deserve them. They'd pulled her out of her special needs program because it was too much hassle to drive her there. This child who used to laugh at everything, who loved school and her friends, was now a ghost of herself. I called CPS and the caseworker came out, but my parents put Juliana in her chair and coached her on what to say. They'd cleaned her up and put her in nice clothes and suddenly acted like concerned parents. The caseworker noted that Juliana seemed shy but healthy, and that the home was appropriate. My parents told her I was a dramatic college student who didn't understand the challenges of raising a special needs child full-time. The caseworker actually lectured me about how hard it was for parents, and how I should be more supportive. After she left, my father told me if I called anyone again, they'd send Juliana to a state facility where she'd be someone else's problem. My mother said they'd already looked into it and found a place that would take her, and maybe that would be better for everyone. They were threatening to institutionalize my sister to keep me quiet. I snuck into their room and found emails between them discussing how much they'd save if Juliana was in state care, how they could finally travel again, how unfair it was that they were stuck with her. They'd been planning this neglect, hoping she'd get sick enough that they'd have an excuse to institutionalize her. One email from my mother said, "If she gets any worse, we can say we can't handle her medical needs at home." They were deliberately letting her deteriorate. I found Juliana's teacher's emails begging for meetings about Juliana's absences, all ignored. I found doctor's appointment cards for checkups that were never attended. They'd been medically neglecting her for months, documenting nothing, so there was no paper trail. Juliana signed to me that she wished she would die so she wouldn't be a burden anymore. My 12-year-old sister wanted to die because our parents had convinced her she was worthless. She asked me if I could take her with me back to college, and I had to explain that I lived in a dorm and couldn't care for her. The look of despair on her face broke something inside me. My parents held all the legal cards as her guardians, and they knew it. I spent the rest of break secretly documenting everything and reaching out to disability lawyers. What I was about to do to my parents would destroy our family, but they'd already destroyed Juliana, meaning I felt not an ounce of remorse. The next morning, I sat at my desk with my laptop and started organizing everything I'd found. My hands shook as I created folders for each type of evidence. I labeled one folder, Medical Neglect, and put in the photos of appointment cards they'd ignored. Another folder got labeled Emails, where I saved screenshots of their messages about putting Juliana in state care. I made a timeline showing when they'd canceled her therapy and pulled her from the school. Each piece of evidence made my stomach turn, but I kept going. Around 11, my phone rang, and the caller ID showed a number I'd left a message for yesterday. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Clarissa Taylor, a disability rights lawyer. She said she'd gotten my voicemail and could meet me this afternoon if it was really as urgent as I'd said. I told her yes, and she gave me her office address downtown. Sunday meant my parents would be at church for their usual 3-hour service where they'd pray and act holy. I heated up some chicken soup from a can and brought it to Juliana's room. She was awake, but just staring at the wall. I helped her sit up and held the bowl while she took tiny sips. Her hands signed thank you over and over between each spoonful. She managed maybe 5 bites before pushing it away, but that was more than she'd eaten in days. I had to look away so she wouldn't see the tears running down my face. At 2 o'clock, I drove to Clarissa's office in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax place. She was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with folders already spread across her desk. I showed her everything on my laptop and she took notes while scrolling through the photos and emails. She said the evidence was strong, but warned me that courts always favor parents unless there's clear danger. We went through options like filing a new CPS complaint with a supervisor instead of a regular caseworker. She explained we'd need medical documentation of Juliana's condition from an actual doctor. The problem was getting my parents to take her for treatment. That evening at dinner, I brought it up as casually as I could manage. I mentioned Juliana's sores looked bad, and maybe we should get them checked. My father actually laughed and said doctors cost too much for someone who won't even try to get better. My mother added that Juliana was being dramatic for attention. I pushed harder, but they shut me down completely. Later that night, I heard crying from Juliana's room. I grabbed my phone and hit record before creeping down the hallway. Her sobs were muffled, but you could hear the pain in every sound. I stood outside her door for 3 minutes recording while she cried from the infected sores. Then I went to the bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet where her pain meds should have been. Empty shelves stared back at me, so I took photos of that too. The next day, I remembered Juliana's teacher had been trying to reach my parents. I found Georgina Langley's number in the school directory and called her from my car. She answered on the second ring, and when I explained who I was, she immediately said she'd been worried sick about Juliana. Within an hour, she'd emailed me copies of every message she'd sent my parents about Juliana's absences. There were dozens going back months, all ignored or given excuse responses. She said she'd tried reporting it to the principal, but got told to mind her own business. She'd been documenting everything just in case someone finally listened. 2 days later, I was sitting with Juliana when my parents burst through the door. My mother demanded I leave Juliana alone because I was making her condition worse with my interference. She said if I didn't stop causing drama, she'd ban me from the house completely. My father stood behind her with his arms crossed like a bouncer. They made me leave Juliana's room and followed me out to make sure I stayed away. That night, while they watched TV, I snuck into my father's home office. His desk was always locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key. In the bottom drawer, I found a folder that made my blood run cold. Brochures for state facilities were stacked inside with one place circled in red pen. An application was already half filled out with Juliana's information. The intake date they'd requested was January 15th, just 2 weeks away. They were really going to do it. I took photos of every page, then put everything back exactly as I'd found it. The next morning, I called Clarissa and told her about the facility application. She went quiet for a long moment, then said we needed to move fast. She would file an emergency motion with family court requesting immediate medical evaluation for Juliana. She warned me this would escalate everything, and my parents would know I was behind it. I told her to do it anyway because 2 weeks wasn't enough time to wait. She said she'd have it filed by the end of the day and to be ready for my parents' reaction when they got served. The next morning, I woke up to screaming downstairs and knew the court papers had arrived. I heard my father's voice getting louder and then glass breaking against the wall. My mother was yelling my name over and over, calling me things I'd never heard her say before. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I walked down the stairs. My father was standing in the kitchen holding the summons, his face red and shaking. He saw me and threw the papers at my face. The corner caught my eye and I had to blink back tears. He started screaming that I'd betrayed the family, that I was an ungrateful brat who didn't understand anything. My mother joined in, saying I'd destroyed everything they'd worked for. She grabbed my laptop from the counter and threw it against the wall. The screen cracked and pieces of plastic went everywhere. My father went upstairs and I heard drawers slamming. He came back with armfuls of my clothes and books. He walked to the front door and threw everything onto the lawn. My textbooks landed in the wet grass and my clothes scattered across the driveway. He kept going back for more while my mother stood there telling me I was no longer their daughter. She said Juliana would suffer because of what I'd done. My father came back with my suitcase and threw it so hard it burst open on the concrete. He told me to get out and never come back. I tried to go check on Juliana, but he blocked the stairs. He pushed me toward the door and I stumbled outside. The door slammed behind me and I heard the lock turn. I stood there in my pajamas looking at my stuff all over the yard. Neighbors were watching from their windows, but nobody came out to help. I picked up what I could carry and shoved it into the broken suitcase. My laptop was completely destroyed, so I left it on the grass. I got in my car with my hands shaking, so bad I could barely get the key in. I drove to the first motel I saw and paid for a room with the emergency cash I kept in my glove box. The room smelled like cigarettes and the carpet had stains, but at least it was safe. I plugged in my phone and called Clarissa. She answered right away and I told her what happened. She said their reaction actually helped our case because it showed how unstable they were. She told me to document everything, including the broken laptop and my stuff thrown on the lawn. She said to stay put and not go back to the house no matter what. After we hung up, I sat on the bed and realized I only had 3 days of clothes. Everything else was still at the house or ruined on the lawn. I called Georgina and told her what was happening. She said she'd been waiting for my signal and would file her report that afternoon. She had attendance records showing Juliana missed 67% of school days this semester. She also had copies of every email she'd sent my parents about concerns. She said she'd include photos of Juliana from the beginning of the year compared to now. The weight loss was obvious and documented. She promised to call CPS within the hour and reference my case number. 2 days passed in that motel room. I kept driving by the house to check on Juliana. On the 3rd day, I parked down the street and walked closer. I could see into her window from the sidewalk. She was lying on her bed alone, just staring at the ceiling. Her wheelchair wasn't anywhere I could see. She wasn't moving at all, just lying there. I called 911 and told them I needed a welfare check on a disabled child. I gave them both case numbers from CPS and explained she was neglected. The operator said they'd send someone right away. I went back to my car and waited. 2 police cars showed up 20 minutes later. I watched the officers knock on the door. My mother answered, and I could see her smiling and gesturing. She went inside and came back with my father. They talked for a few minutes, and then my mother went to get Juliana. She brought her to the door in her wheelchair, dressed in clean clothes. Juliana looked confused, but my mother kept her hand on her shoulder. The officers talked to them for maybe 5 more minutes. They looked at Juliana, and she must have nodded or something because they started to leave. One officer wrote something in his notebook, but they both got back in their cars. They drove away without going inside or checking anything. I wanted to scream, but I just sat there watching my parents take Juliana back inside. The next day, my phone rang from a number I didn't know. The man said his name was Elliot Hobbs from CPS. He'd gotten the supervisor complaint about the first investigation. He said after reviewing everything, there were serious concerns about how it was handled. He wanted to do a surprise home visit tomorrow morning. He asked if I could send him all my documentation right away. I spent the next 3 hours forwarding everything from my phone. The audio recordings of Juliana crying in pain. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The photos of her infected sores. The empty medicine cabinet. The emails about the state facility. The teacher's messages about absences. Every single piece of evidence I had. Elliot responded within an hour saying this was one of the worst cases of medical neglect he'd seen. He said the photos alone were enough to warrant immediate intervention. He confirmed he'd be there at 8 in the morning with a medical professional. Somehow my parents found out about the surprise visit. Georgina drove by that night to check on things and called me right away. Every light in the house was on at 3 in the morning. She could see shadows moving around inside and furniture being carried. She saw my father taking trash bags to the curb. My mother was scrubbing the front windows. They were cleaning everything and probably coaching Juliana on what to say. Elliot showed up at 8 sharp with a nurse. I watched from my car down the street. My parents answered the door and I could see them trying to block the entrance. Elliot held up papers and my father's shoulders dropped. They let him in but stood right behind him. The nurse had a medical bag and clipboard. They were inside for an hour. When they came out, Elliot was on his phone and the nurse was writing notes. My parents followed them outside, my mother crying and my father yelling. Elliot ignored them and got in his car. The nurse documented everything in her report. Multiple infected bed sores on Juliana's back and legs. Severe malnutrition with muscle wasting. Dehydration markers. Muscle atrophy from lack of movement. Signs of prolonged immobility. She stated Juliana needed immediate hospitalization for treatment. My parents refused to consent to hospitalization. They said Juliana was fine and didn't need doctors. Elliot made more phone calls from his car while my parents went back inside. 20 minutes later, my phone rang and Clarissa's name popped up on the screen. She said the judge reviewed Elliot's report and ordered an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning at 9. I needed to bring every piece of evidence I had and be ready to testify about everything I'd witnessed. She warned me it would be brutal since my parents would have their own lawyer who'd try to discredit me. I drove back to my motel and spent the rest of the day organizing all my files into folders, while my hands shook so bad I could barely type. That night, I lay in the cheap motel bed, staring at the ceiling and going over what I'd say in court. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, scared my parents might hurt Juliana now that they knew what was coming. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and went through my testimony notes again, printing extra copies of every photo and email. I got to the courthouse at 8:30 and saw my parents already there with a man in an expensive suit who had to be their lawyer. We all went into the courtroom and the lawyer immediately started telling the judge I was a troubled college student who resented my parents for setting boundaries. He actually suggested I might have caused Juliana's injuries myself during visits to get attention and sympathy from people. The judge called me to testify, and I walked up with my stack of evidence folders, my legs feeling like they might give out. For the next 2 hours, I went through every single piece of evidence, showing photo after photo of Juliana's infected sores and her empty room. I played the audio recording of her crying in pain, while my parents sat there stone-faced. The judge's expression got darker with each new piece of evidence I presented, especially when I showed the emails about the state facility. He asked me detailed questions about dates and times, and I had documentation for everything. Then Georgina took the stand and described how she'd tried for months to get my parents to meetings about Juliana's absences. She showed her own documentation of 67 missed school days and emails that went unanswered for weeks. Her voice cracked when she described watching Juliana go from a happy child who loved school to someone who wouldn't make eye contact anymore. She testified about finding Juliana crying in the bathroom at the school because she couldn't reach the toilet paper dispenser from her wheelchair. The judge reviewed all the evidence for what felt like forever, flipping through pages while the courtroom stayed silent. Then he looked up and said he was ordering immediate temporary custody to the state with Juliana to be taken directly to the hospital for emergency medical treatment. My parents jumped up and started screaming that this was kidnapping and they'd sue everyone involved. My mother called me a lying manipulator while my father yelled about his rights as a parent. 2 security officers had to physically remove them from the courtroom while they kept shouting threats. The judge signed the order, and within an hour, an ambulance arrived at my parents' house with police escort to pick up Juliana. I rode in the back with her, holding her hand while the EMT checked her vitals and started an IV. He told me her blood pressure was dangerously low and she was severely dehydrated, probably had been for weeks. Juliana kept signing scared over and over while I tried to reassure her that she was safe now. At the hospital, they took her straight to a treatment room where Dr. Luther Minton started documenting everything. He photographed every sore, measured the muscle wasting in her legs, and ordered blood tests to check for malnutrition markers. After examining her for an hour, he pulled me aside and said Juliana would have died within weeks if we hadn't intervened when we did. Her body was shutting down from the neglect, and some of the infections had spread dangerously close to her bloodstream. They admitted her immediately and started her on intravenous antibiotics, fluids, and nutrition supplements through a feeding tube since she was too weak to eat much. I stayed in the chair next to her bed for 3 straight days, only leaving to use the bathroom or grab food from the vending machine. The nurses came in every few hours to check her wounds and change her bandages, and slowly she started looking less gray and more like herself. On the 2nd day, she made eye contact with me for the first time in weeks and signed "thank you" before falling back asleep. My parents showed up on day 3 even though the court order said no unsupervised visits. They pushed past the reception desk demanding to see their daughter, saying the hospital had no right to keep them away. My father started threatening to call his lawyer and sue the hospital for kidnapping, while my mother tried to get past the nurses to Juliana's room. Security arrived within minutes and had to physically escort them out while my father screamed that he'd make everyone pay for this. The security guard stationed himself outside Juliana's door after that, checking everyone who came in. Elliot showed up the next morning with a woman who actually knew what cerebral palsy meant, not just another person with a clipboard pretending to care. She spent 2 hours with Juliana, watching how she moved, checking her range of motion, and asking questions through sign language without needing me to translate. Within 3 days, she had physical therapy scheduled, occupational therapy lined up, and a speech therapist who specialized in nonverbal communication coming twice a week. The state found a medical foster home 40 minutes from my college that had taken care of kids with CP before, and the foster mom came to meet Juliana at the hospital before the transfer. I watched Juliana's face light up when the woman showed her pictures of the accessible bathroom with grab bars at the right height and a shower chair that actually fit. The house had ramps instead of stairs and wide doorways for her chair, plus 2 other foster kids who also used wheelchairs so she wouldn't feel alone. They moved her there after a week in the hospital, and I followed the transport van in my car to make sure everything went okay. The foster mom had already set up Juliana's room with soft sheets on a proper hospital bed that could adjust positions, and there were actual toys and books on shelves she could reach from her chair. I had to drive back to college that Sunday since classes started Monday, but we got Juliana set up with a tablet for video calls, and I showed her how to use it with her limited hand mobility. Every night at 7 I called, and the foster mom would prop the tablet up so Juliana could see me while she ate dinner or did her exercises. She sent me pictures throughout the day of Juliana working with the physical therapist, eating real meals at the table with the other kids, and even playing adapted board games. My parents started posting on Facebook about how their mentally unstable daughter had torn their family apart with false accusations and stolen their disabled child. My aunt called me crying, saying she couldn't believe I would do this to family, while my uncle left voicemails calling me selfish and dramatic. Some cousins blocked me on social media after my mother posted photos of herself crying with captions about losing both her daughters to lies. My dad's sister actually drove to my dorm to scream at me in the parking lot about destroying the family until campus security made her leave. But my mom's cousin, who worked in healthcare, called to say she always suspected something was wrong and offered to testify if needed. Clarissa filed the guardianship paperwork in February, arguing that I was the only family member who had protected Juliana from documented medical neglect and abuse. She said the process would take at least 6 months with home studies, background checks, and multiple court hearings, but she felt good about our chances given all the medical evidence. The filing needed character references, financial statements, and a detailed plan for how I would care for Juliana after graduation, which meant hours of paperwork between classes. 3 weeks into physical therapy, Juliana managed to lift her left leg 2 inches off the mat, and the therapist said she cried happy tears for 5 minutes straight. The therapist warned me during a visit that the months without her chair had caused major muscle deterioration, and some of the damage might be permanent. But Juliana was working harder than any kid she'd treated. They started with basic range of motion exercises, then moved to supported standing, and by March she could transfer from her chair to the toilet with minimal help. I picked up a tutoring job on campus teaching freshman biology for $15 an hour, working 20 hours a week between my own classes. My organic chemistry grade dropped to a C, and I failed a sociology quiz because I was driving to see Juliana instead of studying. But when I explained the situation, my professors let me make up the work. The money barely covered gas for the twice-weekly visits, plus the lawyer fees Clarissa discounted but couldn't completely waive, and I started eating ramen for most meals to save money. During a visit in April, Juliana pointed at the other kids going to the school and signed that she wanted to go back when she felt stronger. It was the first time since December she'd talked about wanting anything in the future, instead of just getting through each day. The foster mom had already contacted the special education program at the local elementary school, and they were ready to evaluate Juliana whenever she felt ready. 2 weeks later, my parents' lawyer called Clarissa with an offer that made me want to throw my phone across the room. They would sign over custody without a fight if I agreed not to pursue criminal charges and to keep quiet about what happened. Clarissa told me to think about it overnight, reminding me that getting Juliana safe was more important than getting revenge, and a custody battle could drag on for years if my parents fought it. But the next morning, Clarissa called to say it didn't matter what deal we made, because Luther's medical report had triggered mandatory reporting laws. The district attorney's office had opened a criminal investigation based on the documented injuries and medical neglect, and they would be pursuing felony child endangerment charges with or without my cooperation. The prosecutor assigned to the case had already subpoenaed Juliana's medical records from the past 2 years, showing all the missed appointments and deteriorating condition that my parents had hidden. The prosecutor said this evidence would be enough for felony charges, and told me to prepare for a long legal process ahead. 3 months passed with Juliana in foster care, and I drove down every weekend I could manage between classes. The change in her was incredible to watch happening week by week. She'd gained 15 pounds and her face had filled out so she didn't look like a skeleton anymore. The infected sores on her back and legs had finally healed after weeks of medical treatment and daily wound care. She was using her wheelchair by herself again, rolling around the foster home like she owned the place. I walked in one Saturday and found her watching cartoons and actually laughing at the funny parts. The foster mom told me Juliana had started eating 3 full meals a day, plus snacks without any coaxing needed. During one visit, the foster parents pulled me aside for a serious talk that made my stomach drop. They said if I couldn't get guardianship, they wanted to adopt Juliana because they'd fallen in love with her. The idea of losing my sister to strangers terrified me, but I could see how much they genuinely cared about her. They promised I would always be part of Juliana's life, no matter what happened with the legal stuff. Their house had a ramp and grab bars in the bathroom, and they'd already learned basic sign language to communicate better. These people were giving Juliana everything my parents had denied her for months. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Clarissa saying my parents had been arrested at their house that morning. The charges included aggravated child abuse, medical neglect, and endangerment of a disabled minor. Their mugshots appeared on the local news website within hours, and suddenly everyone in town knew what they'd done. My phone blew up with messages from relatives and family friends asking if it was true. Some called me a traitor for turning in my own parents, but most were shocked they'd been hiding this abuse. The guardianship hearing got scheduled for May, and Clarissa spent hours prepping me for what to expect. 5 months of progress reports from doctors, therapists, and the foster family showed how much Juliana had improved. The physical therapist testified that Juliana had regained most of her mobility once she got consistent treatment. The nutritionist showed weight gain charts proving she'd been severely malnourished before removal from my parents' care. Georgina testified about all the school Juliana had missed, and how worried she'd been for months. Elliot presented his investigation findings, including photos of the bare mattress and empty medicine cabinet. The judge spent an hour reviewing everything while I sat there sweating through my shirt. He finally ruled that I would get limited guardianship with the foster family keeping primary placement until I graduated college. It wasn't everything I wanted, but Juliana was safe, and I had legal say in all her medical and educational decisions. The foster parents hugged me after court and said this was the best outcome for everyone involved. A month later, my parents' criminal case moved forward, and their lawyer contacted Clarissa about a plea deal. They would plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for avoiding jail time completely. The deal included 2 years probation, mandatory parenting classes, and permanent loss of all custody rights to Juliana. They also had to pay $500 a month in child support for her care. Part of me wanted them to rot in jail, but Clarissa said this guaranteed they could never hurt Juliana again. My parents took the deal and stood in court admitting to child neglect while avoiding eye contact with me. By September, Juliana was ready to go back to the school with a full-time aide to help her. The foster mom sent me videos of her first day back, rolling into class with a huge smile on her face. Within 2 weeks, she'd made 3 new friends who ate lunch with her every day. Georgina sent me updates about how well she was doing academically after getting caught up with a tutor. She was participating in class discussions using her communication device and loving every minute of it. I made a decision that semester to switch my major from biology to social work. Seeing how Elliot and the good caseworkers had saved Juliana inspired me to help other kids in bad situations. My advisor helped me map out a plan to graduate a semester early by taking summer classes. It meant giving up my breaks, but I needed to get my degree faster, so I could take care of Juliana properly. Every weekend I drove to the foster home and the mom taught me Juliana's daily care routines. She showed me how to help with transfers, manage medications, and do the physical therapy exercises. Juliana would watch us and sign that she was excited about living with me after I graduated. We practiced her morning routine together, and I learned how to braid her hair the way she liked it. 6 months after everything started, Juliana's school had their spring talent show. She'd been working with the music teacher to use assistive technology that let her control sounds with head movements. When she rolled onto that stage in her sparkly dress, I completely lost it. She performed a whole song by moving her head to trigger different notes on the computer. Every movement was deliberate and practiced, and she nailed every single note perfectly. The whole auditorium erupted in applause when she finished, and she had the biggest smile I'd ever seen. I ugly cried through the entire thing, not even trying to hide the tears streaming down my face. My little sister, who my parents said was worthless, had just performed in front of hundreds of people. The foster parents were crying too, and even Georgina was wiping her eyes. After the show, Juliana signed "Did good" over and over while we all hugged her. That night, I knew everything we'd been through was worth it to see her this happy and confident again. 3 weeks before graduation, I got the call from Clarissa that changed everything. The judge had reviewed all the evidence from the past year and approved my petition for full guardianship once I graduated. I drove straight to the foster home and found Juliana doing homework at the kitchen table with her tutor. When I told her the news, she started signing "really" over and over while tears rolled down her face. The foster mom helped me start apartment hunting online that night, looking for places with wheelchair ramps and wide doorways near Juliana's school. We found a 2-bedroom place with an accessible bathroom just 3 blocks from campus. I signed the lease using my savings from tutoring and the child support payments my parents had been ordered to pay. Graduation day came faster than expected, and I walked across that stage knowing Juliana was watching from the audience with the foster family. My professors had written letters supporting my guardianship application, after seeing how hard I'd worked to balance school and Juliana's care. The day after graduation, I rented a moving truck, and the foster dad helped me move my stuff from the dorm to the new apartment. Juliana's social worker brought over all the medical equipment we'd need, including a hospital bed and shower chair. The foster mom spent 2 days teaching me Juliana's medication schedule and showing me how to do her stretching exercises properly. On move-in day, Juliana rolled through every room of our apartment, touching the walls and looking at everything. When we got to her bedroom, she saw I'd painted it purple, her favorite color, and hung up all her drawings from the school. She signed "home" and then kept signing it while we both cried. That first night, I made spaghetti, the only thing I knew how to cook well, and we ate dinner at our little kitchen table. I helped her get ready for bed, and she fell asleep holding my hand. Our morning routine started at 6 when I'd help her out of bed and into her chair. We'd do her exercises while watching cartoons. Then I'd help her shower and get dressed for school. I'd make breakfast, usually cereal or toast, and pack her lunch with a note inside like the foster mom used to do. The school bus with a wheelchair lift picked her up at 7:30, and I'd wave from the window until she was out of sight. While she was at the school, I worked at a social services office doing intake interviews. My boss let me leave early to be home when Juliana's bus arrived at 3. We'd do homework together at the kitchen table, me learning 6th grade math all over again to help her. Dinner was at 6, usually something simple I could manage like tacos or grilled cheese. After dinner, we'd watch movies on the couch with her head on my shoulder. Bedtime was at 8:30 with medications, teeth brushing, and a chapter from whatever book we were reading together. The routine was exhausting, but seeing her gain weight and smile more made every sacrifice worth it. Her physical therapist came twice a week and said her muscle tone was improving faster than expected. The occupational therapist taught her new ways to use her communication device, and she was getting faster at typing. 4 months after moving in, we had our follow-up with the neurologist who couldn't believe Juliana's brain scans. She hadn't had a single seizure since getting proper medication and consistent care. Her teacher sent home a note saying Juliana was participating more in class and had made 2 best friends who came over for sleepovers. Georgina started visiting us every Sunday for lunch, bringing craft supplies for projects she and Juliana would work on together. She helped Juliana build a volcano for the science fair that actually erupted with baking soda and vinegar. Georgina told me that fighting for Juliana had been the proudest moment of her teaching career. She'd become like an aunt to us, someone we could count on when things got hard. Juliana's speech therapist started working with her on using her device for longer conversations. By winter, she could tell whole stories about her day at the school. A year after moving in together, Juliana's school had their awards ceremony. I sat in the audience watching her roll up the ramp to the stage in her prettiest dress. The principal announced she'd won the Most Improved Student Award for her academic progress. Juliana used her communication device to give a speech she'd been practicing for weeks. Her electronic voice filled the auditorium saying thank you to her teachers, and then thanking me for never giving up on her. Every single person in that room was crying, including me. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived from my parents' lawyer. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting asking for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild our relationship. She wrote about getting therapy and understanding what they'd done wrong. My father had added a note about wanting to make amends and be part of our lives again. I sat at the kitchen table and read the whole thing to Juliana. She listened carefully, then looked at me and signed no, very clearly. I told her I respected her choice completely and threw the letter in the trash. We never responded, and they never wrote again. Juliana's 13th birthday fell on a Saturday, and I'd invited all her friends from the school. We decorated the apartment with streamers and balloons, and I'd even managed to bake a cake that didn't burn. 8 kids showed up with presents, and we played games adapted for Juliana's chair. Her best friend helped her blow out the candles, and everyone sang happy birthday. That night, after everyone left, I helped her get ready for bed. She was exhausted but happy, still wearing her birthday crown from the party. As I tucked her in, she signed happy and then safe while looking right at me. We'd made it through absolute hell to get here, but we were finally home. That's the end of this story. Thanks for being here. It honestly makes these little moments feel bigger. Subscribe if you'd like to share more of them with me.